I'm no shy critic of superhero film as a genre that I think has probably been killed by its own bloated size and might be taking modern film going with it by and by. But I think there's no better example than Sony's Spider-Man universe, or rather its Spider-Man-less universe. So far, 6 films that have everything to do with Spider-Man conceptually because they're all movies about Spider-Man characters, but Spider-Man never actually appears. And we all presumed that it was because Sony was never allowed to use him. Turns out that wasn't true at all. Yeah, Spider-Man was never prevented by Marvel from appearing in any Sony films. And that is what we're talking about this week. How Sony kneecapped its own Spider-Man universe by apparently ignoring Spider-Man. I'm Dan Umpton, and this is the Doomcast. First off, do me a favor, hit subscribe and the bell. I make about one of these videos a week. They are all pretty great, so please don't miss even one. Spider-Man did sort of kick off superhero film as a craze with the 2002 Spider-Man and that trilogy, which led to the Nolan Batman trilogy, which led to Iron Man, and then eventually the MCU and the DCEU. And of course, Spider-Man wasn't in the MCU for the longest time because Sony owned the movie rights that Disney didn't have, and they were making their own Spider-Man movies. That changed in 2016 when Spider-Man was allowed into the MCU in partnership with Sony. Sony decided that they'd start making films about Spider-Man's villains. Oh, and animated stuff too, which has been all really great. We're going to focus mostly on live action, but I eventually am going to get back to the animated stuff. So, pre-multiverse, this makes sense to a degree, not to include Spider-Man, I guess, right? Venom could be separate and show up in San Francisco, whereas Peter's in New York City. Why Venom looks vaguely like a Spider-Man-like monster is gently ignored. And he doesn't make quite as much sense on his own, but the first movie was fine. Morbius ends up well after the multiverse was established by No Way Home and Doctor Strange, and frankly, Michael Keaton's Vulture showing up there didn't really make a lick of sense, even the way they explained it. Of course, it makes a little more sense in context, since apparently Morbius was supposed to have come out in early 2020, was delayed by the pandemic. Of course, the pandemic screwed up everything, but this really would have made it actually weirder in retrospect, because why would he be there if the multiverse exists anyway? And then Madame Web debuted several Spider-Man adjacent characters, a tribe of Amazonian spider totem people, Madame Web herself, and then even teased Peter Parker himself inside of Emma Roberts' belly, but did not feature or involve any Spider-Man, even in the future. And with Variety's story last Saturday that Sony's Spider-Man universe was never really supposed to be Spider-Man-less because they were never prohibited from using Spider-Man, I have to wonder why in the hell you'd actually do this. Each of these film franchises or individual films made more sense with the inclusion of Spider-Man and vastly more successful with him in it. I can't understand why you'd make these at all. And of course, you always could have made them, and I guess I should have realized before, maybe we all should have, because you were making animated Spider-Man movies this entire time, which for some reason we never really scratched our heads at. I guess maybe we all wrote it off as, hey, that's animated so it's separate, but I don't really know why, because the license is the license is the license. But I can understand that there are a number of huge hurdles for having a live action Spider-Man in your not quite Spider-Man movies, right? One, there's massive necessary MCU synergy needed, but like you could kind of solve that in one of a few ways. One, you synergize. Two, you explain that the movies take place in a specific past point that wouldn't interfere with the rest of MCU continuity. Or three, you explain it as a multiversal instance, which is confusing but gives you kind of carte blanche, and that's my least favorite option. The other major hurdle, of course, is the cost of talent and casting. Not like Tom Holland would be super cheap, but there's also issues having characters played by other MCU actors like Chiwetel Ejiofor or Aaron Taylor Johnson, who've also occupied roles in the MCU and in the Spider-Man universe as well. That would be very confusing. However, the major cost hurdle is undoubtedly Spider-Man primarily, and keeping that same actor. could cast a different Spider-Man. Conceivably, there's nothing preventing them from doing that either and just saying it's a multiverse. They could have continued making movies with Andrew Garfield this whole time. They could have continued making movies with Andrew Garfield this whole time? Okay, anyway, they weren't going to do Tom Holland, but the cost of having a consistent Spider-Man would have to be outweighed by the sheer bank that they would have made off of his involvement in the movie, right? Spider-Man is a goldmine. Morbius just morbs. You know, even the sources at Variety stated in that article that the Sony films felt cynical, like a product made just for a cash grab. And I have to agree, although I can't understand how products like that get made anyway. Not that I didn't like some of these. I did like the Venom films for the most part, but if you're going to invest $100 million into a single film, why not streamline that project with competent creatives? Let it be the best movie that it could possibly be. In terms of actual cinema, work with whoever you have to. Include the obvious central figure to film stuff like Venom or Kraven or Madam Web or Morbius, and then perhaps give them a chance to stand on their own. If anything, all of these characters are more compelling for their involvement with Spider-Man, and without him, they're unanchored, they're directionless, and they're frankly botched without that pivotal context, I think. Most people don't know who Kraven or Morbius or Madam Web are. Maybe people like my parents are vaguely familiar with what Venom might be, but that's only through me. But most of the movie-going public, even kids, probably not going to be that familiar with deep-cut characters like that. But could you imagine how a movie based faithfully on Kraven's last hunt, even loosely, might have been, or a film based on the first appearance of Morbius, in which Spider-Man had 6 freaking arms? Okay, you could probably skip that part, but my point still stands. Making Morbius and making the villain in Morbius another vampire, albeit a canonically Marvel one, makes a lot less sense than introducing Spider-Man as the ostensible antagonist to Morbius if you want to make Morbius the actual protagonist, or at least Blade. Madam Web without Spider-Man is complete nonsense, right? It's right there in the name. Fortunately, I do think that these movies are ultimately products, and that means that they will probably stop getting made once they cease being profitable. And I think that that point is definitely coming. Kraven only made $11 million in its opening weekend, and opened in 1,000 fewer theaters than Madam Web did. That's 1,000 fewer. That means that's 20 fewer per state. Imagining opening up in 20 fewer theaters in Alaska or Wyoming. That's probably 0 theaters in those states. Imagine being the guy that flew from Alaska to Wyoming just because you had to see Kraven the Hunter. I don't think that person exists. What I'm saying is, eventually, if you just don't see them, like even I didn't see it, and I'm probably like at least the guy who's going to be like, I guess I have to see it, they're probably going to stop getting made. And I don't know if that's a great thing for superhero movies, but maybe that's a better thing for just movies. I don't know what you think. Let me know in the comments. Thanks everybody for watching. That's it for this week. I'll see you again next week. Peace.